they deserve credit for producing MG versions of all the Rovers. So the 25, 45, and 75.
And they were good, weren't they? They
They
were.
Well,
became the
that's the
ZR,
point.
the
Yeah.
ZS, and the
I
ZT,
mean,
didn't
Yeah.
they?
yeah, they became the ZR, ZS, and ZT. And obviously, you can accuse them yet again of cynical badge engineering. But the difference with these cars was that the chassis were really well
They
developed.
were.
And a chap called Rob Oldacre, who was heavily involved with that, probably drove that through. I mean, he was a racer and he had been a B Bentley development engineer, and then he previously worked at Rover. So he knew a lot about chassis development. I'm sure there were many other people involved with it, but the result was cars that actually did stack up. And in fact, for a brief period before the 2001 Mini came out, the MG ZR, the smallest of them, was the best-selling hot hatch in the UK.
Wow.
Not least because they cleverly offered it with low-power engines, which may sound counterintuitive, but the point was that young people could then insure it.
Yeah.
So there were very
I
few.
was I was 16, 17, I think, when those cars were knocking about, and to someone my age, they were super desirable. It didn't matter that it was a Rover 25, really. You know, it looked cool. They came in bright colours. They had, I think,
They were all
multi-spoke
yellow, weren't
wheels.
they?
Yeah,
So many of them were yellow. Yeah,
they,
they were
Yeah,
cool.
they had sporty body kits.
Yeah.
They seemed pretty good to drive. And then the ZS, the bigger one, there was a hatch and a saloon, wasn't there? My uncle had one of each, both with the V6,
wow.
180 horsepower V6.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds great now, doesn't
Yeah.
it? A small saloon, V6 engine, proper sporting
Yeah.
chassis.
Well,
Fantastic.
of the three, that was the actually the best handling of the lot,
Yeah, my uncle
because,
still stuck one of them through a hedge backwards at speed.
well,
Says more about him, I think.
yeah. But because it had, I think, double wishbones at the front, because it was essentially a Honda, and so it was more tunable than the other two, which had McPherson struts at the front. So it was a really well balanced car, despite a bit V6 up front, but it was a lightweight, relatively speaking, V6. So it had a pretty horrible dashboard, but it was actually the best of the three to drive as a
Mm.
V6. Um,
When can we get on to
anyway,
the one with the proper engine in it?
and then yes, this is where the madness starts.
The brilliant
Having,
madness, the
if you like,
total
scored a hat
glorious
trick with,
insanity.
well, yeah, scored a hat trick with those three. They then thought, why don't we build a V8 powered Rover 75 or MGZT? And so the idea was to put an off the shelf Ford, I think 4.6 litre
It
V8, the
was, yeah.
Mustang engine in the car. But in order to do that, you had to convert it from front wheel drive to rear, um, which is, you're almost re engineering half the underside of the car, and or more than that, really.
That is an
Uh,
enormous undertaking for any manufacturer.
Yeah, well, in fact, the only manufacturer I'm aware of that has ever done that before is, guess, British Leyland, when the Triumph 1300, uh, which was a very good car in 1966, was converted to rear-wheel drive to become the Triumph Toledo and ultimately the Dolomite and Dolomite Sprint. Actually, quite a successful conversion,
Yeah.
because they sold quite a lot of those cars. But on the face of it, madness. In the case of the ZT, however, they basically gave the contractor to develop it to ProDrive, a good choice. But I don't know what it cost, but it would be far in excess of the
Ruinous.
just under the profits. Well, there weren't any profits, but the nominal profits on just under a
Yeah.
thousand cars
That's
built.
madness.
Does that
Um,
include, because there was an estate and there was a Rover, wasn't there? There was a Rover
There
75
was, yeah, there
V8.
was towards the end there was a Rover version with a different nose with a sort of Audi-esque grille,
Yeah.
and you could only have that with an automatic transmission. I think it was a 3 speed or a 4 speed,
Oh
but
my goodness.
quite a crude
Oh my
box.
goodness.
I mean, the fuel consumption would have been appalling. But in fact, the MG version really drove very well, and
It was absolutely hilarious. I can
yeah,
remember driving one around Mallory Park in the wet, chasing Anthony Reid. And basically, the limiting factor was just how much laughing you were doing, because you could literally have laughed yourself off the track. It would go
yeah,
basically, you just sort of tip it into a corner, then turn the steering wheel as far as you possibly could in the opposite direction, and then just wait for events to develop. It was, I mean, it was pretty rubbish. I can remember there's nowhere, because it had that massive transmission in it, which it was never designed to have. There was basically nowhere to put your left foot, and it had all sorts of other issues. But just as a thing to get in and hoon about, it was a right laugh.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a pretty keen club for them, which is a good thing because uh, backup for those is it's there, but not the easiest thing to keep on the road. But I mean, their values hold pretty well, and I'm quite sure that that will be a proper classic if it isn't already.
I'm amazed, Richard, you don't already have one in one of your mini
Yeah.
sheds. I bet you're
Well,
tempted.
there's still time.
Early days.
Did you say 1,000 cars?
Yeah, I think it's 991, but
Blimey.
I need to check that. But yeah,
All that
and I
effort
would
for.
imagine the survival rate is fairly high, even though
Yeah,
I witnessed one being rolled on the autocar handling
I've seen the
day
video.
um, by, I won't name
It
him,
wasn't
but
me.
something from Lotus.
Yeah, the footage is quite dramatic, isn't it? I have seen
Yeah,
that.
um, yeah. Um, so if you thought that was mad, it wasn't as mad as suddenly deciding to try to make a supercar or something
Oh
approaching
my
it and
god,
Oh,
I
buying
yeah.
forgot.
No, I did
the
not.
rights to a De Tomaso car whose name has gone out of my head, um, and re-engineering it again with a V8
Wasn't
to
there a company
create.
called Quail involved in it? Q V A L E.
I think they were slightly, but yes, they
Doesn't matter.
produced this carbon-bodied rear-wheel drive V8 coupe called the MG SV, and so quite a chunk of it was made in Italy, in Turin. In fact, the quality of the carbon fiber body was extraordinarily good, better than a lot of big names were producing at the time. Um, but they, must have spent millions redeveloping this
Who's
car,
did Peter
which
Stevens style
hadn't
it?
been developed enough. Sorry,
Did,
Andrew.
did,
What?
did Peter Stevens style it, or have I
He
just?
did.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Because it was a good-looking thing, I thought.
Yeah, I
Pause.
thought less so.
Okay, fair enough.
There was an Italian development engineer who'd come from De Tomaso who worked on it at Longbridge, and he came up with this wonderful line, which was "It will aggress you," which I think absolutely summed it up. And yeah, so anyway, I there's a rumor that in fact they never actually sold one of them properly as a sort of genuine retail sale. Obviously, several of them were sold in the end, and
I've
I think
driven
some
one.
owners have sort of finished the development off. But
Yeah. And what was the
yeah,
difference? Because there were two, weren't there? There was an SV and there was an SVR. And I think the SVR just must have just had a pokier engine in it. And
yeah,
I,
I
and I,
think so.
and I can't even
Yeah,
remember which one I drove because it was a while back. I do remember it wasn't terribly good. And it was, when it was new, it was enormously expensive, wasn't it?
it was understandably in a way because of the just the carbon body
Yeah,
was.
but the problem was is that they were somehow expecting people to spend Ferrari money on something with an MG badge, and that was, it was never going
Well,
to happen, was it?
that's one problem. We haven't got time to list all the others, I would say. Um, but
But
yeah,
yes, no, you're right though, because why would they go off and try and do something like that when there's a business to be salvaged?
well, I think we're jumping ahead here, but just briefly, I mean, there was a feeling when the whole thing collapsed that the management had just thought, well, this is never going to work. We might as well have a bit of fun while we still can.